Hi, Travis Shaw again with the Mosby Heritage Area Association. This is our last stop of the day as we explore World War I across the Heritage area. Standing here this afternoon in the Warrenton Cemetery, the county seat of Fauquier County. And as we've been wandering the cemetery this afternoon, we have really seen the full breadth of Virginia's participation in World War I. You know, we saw graves from fighter pilots, nurses, infantry sergeants, guys in the Quartermaster Corps and the Pioneer Corps, which really kind of underscores what we've been talking about all day, and that is just how Virginians from almost every walk of life came together to support the war effort in 1917 and 1918. You know, many of them were drafted, many of them volunteered for service or were in the National Guard and were called up to serve. But there are some Virginians that went ahead and kind of jumped the gun and got involved in the war before the United States declared war in April of 1917. And one of those guys, a really fascinating character that we've just learned about, is actually buried here in the Warrenton Cemetery. And James is going to tell us a little bit about him and his military service, right?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Captain Holdern, who was a graduate of VMI. His family resided here in Warrenton. He was actually born in Alexandria in Egypt while they were serving as missionaries, but he resided here mostly and identified as an American. He actually spent 6 years at VMI before being commissioned into the U.S. Army, but he felt that he wasn't seeing enough action. He graduated from VMI and was commissioned in 1914. So shortly after war broke out in Europe, he used his connections as a member of his family back in the UK, went over to the UK and was commissioned as an officer in the Irish Guards, one of the more elite regiments of the British Army. He was posted to the 2nd Battalion, seeing action with them in 1915 and 1916 alongside such notable characters as Jack Kipling, Rudyard Kipling's son, who was killed at the Battle of Loos. Later on, he's serving with them during the Battle of the Somme and near the position where at Thiepval when he's wounded pretty horribly by a shell, which hits him in the spine, and he spends 2-3 years in and out of hospitals in the UK before he's finally demobilized and sent back to the United States.
Okay, and then he comes back to Warrenton for a time, I understand.
Yes, he comes back to Warrenton, but he struggles with his wound the rest of his life. It's a pretty horrible wound. It disables him permanently, and he's traveling all over, eventually making it up to Philadelphia to try to get specialized surgery, where he passes away in 1929.
Okay. So, I mean, his story, while, kind of unique amongst all the stories that we've talked about today, really, again, underscores just how many different ways this conflict affected people's lives and touched people's lives here across the 5 counties of the Heritage area. We talked about, the African-American experience. We talked about women who went away as nurses. The governor kind of directing Virginia's war effort. We talked about horses and other equines and their service in the war. So we really, got this tremendous variety of experience. And I think, his is so unique. And one thing that isn't unique, I guess, about his situation is he comes home, wounded both kind of, I guess, physically and mentally. He's dealing with his wartime experience.
Absolutely. It's important to note that we talk about the over 130,000 dead during the First World War, but we also have to remember that many more of those were wounded both physically and psychologically. And returning from that war was not an amazing experience for men, no matter what army you served in, whether it be one of the Commonwealth or British Empire forces, or in the French Foreign Legion, or with the United States forces. It was a really bad experience coming back because we didn't have the structures in place to support all of these returning veterans. And there's a reason that for the next war, the Second World War, the GI Bill is very easily passed to get those men the support they need when they're coming home to re-enter civilian society. And it's a real tragedy that for the First World War generation, that really didn't exist yet, and they had to develop it, and there were plenty of mistakes made along the way. So as we're here to talk about whether it be Armistice Day with the 101st anniversary of the end of the First World War, or it being another Veterans Day here in the United States, really thinking about how we talk about the veterans, how we work with them, and thinking about those that came before and led the way, and in this case, the First World War generation.
Absolutely. I'm glad you kind of tied that back around to what we began this day talking about, and that is how, this First World War generation really goes on to shape the 20th century in ways that, I think a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate nowadays. And their experience is certainly worthy of remembrance. And so we're so glad that you guys joined us today as we took this journey across the Heritage area and this journey back to the First World War. Again, you know, as we'd like to thank you, James, for
No
coming
problem.
out and
Anytime.
giving us the expert opinion on all this stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anne Marie, for all that you do, and thank you guys for viewing, and a special thanks to all of our veterans out there. Thank you for your service. We do appreciate it. And thank you for supporting the Mosby Heritage Area Association.